the beautiful game, and the Golden Snitch, a bedtime tour through 2 World Cups. Here is something I have always found quietly wonderful. A secret hiding in plain sight. 2 of the greatest spectacles ever dreamed up by human beings, one entirely real and one entirely imagined, are underneath their wildly different rules, telling almost exactly the same story. One is played on green grass before the watching eyes of nearly half the planet, with a single round ball and a great deal of heartbreak. The other is played high in the air on broomsticks with 4 enchanted balls and a tiny winged speck of gold that can decide everything in a single instant. And tonight, slowly and gently, I am going to lay them side by side in the dark and show you how alike they truly are. But before we drift up into the floodlights together, let me ask you the small question I always like to ask. Wherever in the world you happen to be lying right now, tell me down in the comments which country you are listening from tonight. Because half the wonder of a World Cup is the way it gathers the whole earth into a single hell breath. And I love to see just how far this little voice manages to travel in the dark. And once you have, let your shoulders go soft and heavy against the pillow, and we will begin. Let me say first what this is and what it is not. We are not going to relive any single match tonight, or shout through the great goals you may already remember. We are going to do something gentler and I think more interesting for a tired mind. We are going to set 2 great tournaments quietly beside one another, the real and the magical, and study the strange and beautiful ways they rhyme. The way you might lay 2 old photographs on a table by lamplight and slowly realize they show the same family. Both of these grand contests share the same heartbeat, the same patient 4-year rhythm. The real one comes around once every 4 years, and so does the imagined one. There is a deep and ancient comfort in that slow drumbeat of waiting. The long 3 years of ordinary life, and then the one summer when, suddenly, the whole world leans in the same direction at once. 3 years of quiet, and then the festival. It is a rhythm older than either game, the rhythm of harvests and pilgrimages and the great gatherings of peoples, and both of these tournaments tap into something very deep in us by keeping it, and both are far older than you might guess, though one is older by a long way. The real World Cup, for all its enormous fame, is really quite young. The very first one was held in the year 1930, hosted by the small country of Uruguay, and only 13 teams took part, 'cause in those days many of the European sides could not be persuaded to make the long sea voyage across the world to play. The host nation won that first one, beating its neighbor, Argentina, by 4 goals, 2-2, and a tradition was quietly born that would grow within a single human lifetime into the largest shared event on Earth. The magical version, by contrast, is ancient. In the lore of the wizarding world, the first Quidditch World Cup was held all the way back in the year 1473, more than 4.5 centuries before the Muggles ever thought to organize their own. Only European teams took part in that first one, just as in the real game's beginning, and it has a rather notorious reputation, because the final between the teams of Transylvania and Flanders is remembered as the match in which all 700 known ways of committing a foul were used at least once. We will come back later and more gently to the matter of violence in both games, for it is one of the places where they rhyme most surprisingly. Now, let us lay the 2 games themselves side by side, slowly, because the contrast in their rules is the whole key to everything that follows. Football, the real game, is a marvel of simplicity. There is one ball. There is one way to score, which is to put that ball into the net, and each time you do, it is worth exactly 1 goal, no more and no less. A child anywhere on earth can understand it in a moment, and that simplicity is a great part of its power. It is the most democratic game there is, needing nothing but a ball and a patch of ground and 2 things to stand for: goalposts. The magical game is a far stranger and more cluttered machine, and learning its shape is half the fun. Each team has 7 players, and they are not all doing the same job. There are 3 players, called chasers, whose task is to score goals. There are 2 players, called beaters, whose job is to defend their teammates from harm. There is 1 keeper, who guards the goals, much like a goalkeeper in the real game. And then there is 1 single, special player, set apart from all the rest, called the seeker, whose entire purpose is something else altogether. And there is not 1 ball in this game, but 4, all of them in the air at once, and 3 of them enchanted to move and act on their own. There is the large red ball the chasers throw, called the quaffle, which they hurl through 1 of 3 tall hoops to score. And each goal scored this way is worth 10 points. There are 2 heavy black balls, called bludgers, which fly about of their own wicked accord, trying to knock the players from their brooms, which is why the beaters exist, to swat them away. And there is the 4th ball, the small one, the golden one, and it changes everything. That 4th ball is called the Golden Snitch, and it is the heart of the whole game and the thing that makes the magical tournament so unlike the real one. It is a tiny thing, no larger than a walnut, with delicate silver wings, and it is enchanted to be almost impossibly fast and to hide. Okay? It darts and vanishes and reappears, flickering at the very edge of sight. Okay? And the only player allowed to chase it is that single set-apart figure, the seeker. Okay? And here is the rule that turns the whole game on its head. Okay? Catching the snitch is worth 150 points all at once, and the instant it is caught, the entire game ends. Sit with how strange and wonderful that is, because it is the single biggest difference between the 2 worlds. In the real game, the score climbs slowly, 1 goal at a time, 10 goals being a once-in-a-generation flood. In the magical game, the steady work of the chasers earns 10 points at a stroke, again and again, all evening long, while off to the side a lonely seeker hunts for a tiny golden speck that, when finally caught, is worth 15 ordinary goals in a single instant and brings the whole contest crashing to its end. 1 game accumulates. The other can be transformed forever in the space of 1 heartbeat. There is a gentle and rather sad piece of history hidden inside that little golden ball, and it is worth knowing as you grow drowsy. In the earliest days of the magical game, there was no enchanted snitch at all. In its place flew a real bird, a tiny, round, golden creature called the snidget. Swift and darting and almost impossible to catch, and the early seekers would hunt the living bird itself. So many snidgets were caught in the name of the game that the little birds were very nearly driven from the world entirely until kind wizards stepped in to protect them and forbade their use. And so a clever craftsman invented a small mechanical golden ball that could fly and dart and hide exactly as the bird once had, so that the game might keep its beating heart without costing a single living thing. The snitch you imagine flickering through the night sky is, in truth, a gentle act of mercy, a way to save a small bird by remembering it forever in gold. And this, right here, is where the 2 worlds begin to tell the very same story, only in different keys. Because what is that lonely seeker hunting for the 1 decisive golden moment but the purest possible picture of the thing every football fan worships and fears in equal measure? The single genius, the 1 player who, in a flash, out of nothing, can change everything. Football has its grinding teamwork, its long, patient build-up, just as the magical chasers do. But football also has its moments of pure individual magic, the run from deep, the impossible goal, the instant that decides a tournament, and that is the snitch made flesh. So let me tell you about the most famous match in all of wizarding sport, because it is the perfect little fable of this exact tension. And once you see it, you will see it everywhere in the real game too. In the lore of the books, the 422nd Quidditch World Cup was held in the year 1994, and its final was played before a crowd of 100,000 spectators in a stadium raised from the bare ground by magic. The two finalists were the national teams of Ireland and Bulgaria, and that match holds, inside its strange rules, one of the truest things ever said about the real, beautiful game. Bulgaria had, in its ranks, the single greatest player in the world, a young seeker named Viktor Krum, only about 18 years old, was already worshipped across the whole magical earth as the finest there had ever been. He was famous for a daring and terrifying move, in which he would plunge straight down toward the ground at impossible speed, as though he had spotted the snitch, only to pull up at the last possible instant, tricking the opposing seeker into following him and crashing into the earth. He was a phenomenon, a teenage prodigy whose gifts seemed to belong to another order of being entirely, and in that final, his team lost. Here is what happened, and it is exquisite. Ireland did not have a single transcendent superstar. What Ireland had was three magnificent chasers, Troy and Mullet and Moran, who worked together with such speed and harmony that they scored goal after goal after goal, 10 points at a time, building an enormous and steady lead through sheer collective brilliance. And Krum, the lone genius on the other side, watching his team fall further and further behind, understood that Bulgaria could not possibly win. So he did the only thing left to him. He caught the snitch himself, ending the game on his own terms, earning his team its 150 points in a measure of dignity, even though it meant the final whistle would blow with his side still behind. The score was 170 to 160. Ireland won, and the greatest individual player in the world had caught the most important object in the game and still lost. If you love football, that story should make your heart ache, because you have seen it happen again and again with real people on real grass. You have seen the one impossibly gifted player, the genius of his generation, carry a lesser team almost to glory on his back, alone, only to be beaten at the last by a side that was simply more complete, more balanced, more together. The Lone Star can catch the snitch. He can produce the moment of pure magic. And still, the deeper, fuller, more united team can lift the trophy. Ireland against Bulgaria in 1994 is the oldest argument in football, told in the language of broomsticks. You can hear that same ache in the real World Cup if you listen. Think of the player who is, by most measures, the greatest the real game has ever produced in our age. A small magician from Argentina named Lionel Messi, who for years carried his nation's hopes the way Krum carried Bulgaria's, and who tasted that exact heartbreak more than once before. At long last, and in his final years, he was given the team around him to finish the dream. The genius and the collective. The snitch and the steady stream of goals. The two World Cups have been arguing about the very same thing, one in our world and one in the imagined one, for as long as either has existed. Let us stay a while with these prodigies, these set-apart young figures, as both worlds adore them, and both worlds make them carry impossible weight. The seeker in the magical game is almost always the smallest and lightest player, chosen for speed and nerve and an uncanny eye, and the very best of them are often astonishingly young. In the world of the books, the boy hero himself becomes the youngest seeker his school had seen in a full century, lifted onto a broom and into the role almost before he understood what was happening. And the great Krum was scarcely more than a boy when the whole world already called him the best alive. And the real game does exactly the same thing, hands its heaviest burdens to children and watches them soar. The youngest player ever to win the entire World Cup was a 17-year-old named Pelé, who, in the year 1958, not only won the tournament for Brazil, but scored in the final itself. At the age of 17 years and 249 days, a record that has stood now for the better part of 70 years. The youngest player ever simply to appear in a World Cup was a boy of 17 years and 41 days. And, in our own time, a young Frenchman named Kylian Mbappé announced himself to the planet by winning the World Cup as a teenager and then, 4 years later, scoring 3 goals in a single final, a thing only one other man had ever done. There is something almost mythical about these gifted children in both worlds. And I think it is part of what makes these tournaments feel so much larger than mere games. We love to watch the very young carry the very large. We love the idea that genius can arrive fully formed in someone barely old enough to drive, that a teenager on a broom or a teenager on the grass can hold the hopes of an entire nation in their small hands and not be crushed by them. It's a kind of fairy tale that both worlds keep telling, the boy or girl who is somehow ready before they should be ready and rises to it. There is a darker and more cunning side to these geniuses, too, in both worlds, and it is one of the more honest ways the two games rhyme. The Great Seeker's most famous trick, the plunging dive I described, is named after the player who first dared it. And it is pure deception, a beautiful lie told at 100 miles an hour, designed to fool a rival into hurling himself into the ground. It is genius used as trickery, brilliance bent entirely toward the art of the feint. And the real game knows that art intimately, for football is, among other things, sport of glorious deception, of the dummy and the swerve and the shoulder drop, of sending a defender lunging the wrong way with a single twitch of the hips. But it also knows the darker version, the deception that crosses the line. And its most famous example belongs to a small Argentine genius who, in the year 1986, punched a ball into the net with his hand and afterward called it, with a wink, the hand of a god. Speed. In that very same match, only minutes later, he scored what many still call the single greatest goal ever struck. The cheat and the masterpiece, side by side, from the very same man, within the space of a few minutes. Genius, in both worlds, has always walked very close to mischief. Now, let us drift through the great records of each game, side by side, because the numbers themselves rhyme in lovely ways. In the real World Cup, the country that has won the most is Brazil, with 5 championships claimed in the years 1958, 1962, 1970, 1994, and 2002. Behind them sit Germany and Italy with 4 each, and then Argentina with 3, including their most recent triumph before Uruguay and France with 2 apiece, and England and Spain with a single title each. Those are the great dynasties of the real game, the bloodlines of glory. The magical world keeps its own dynasties. And though the books are quieter about the international tournament's full history, they are very clear about who rules the domestic game. The most successful club in the British and Irish League is a Scottish side called the Montrose Magpies, who have won their league a remarkable 32 times, a record of sustained dominance that dwarfs almost anything in the real club game. There is the oldest club of all, Puddlemere United, founded astonishingly early in the year 1163, older than many real nations. And there is the team beloved by the book's own red-headed family, the Chudley Cannons, who once won everything and then, sadly and comically, became perennial losers. Their official motto eventually reduced to a wish that they might simply keep their fingers crossed and hope for the best. And let us not forget the lonely guardians at the back of each game, for both worlds quietly loved their goalkeepers. In the magical game, the keeper hovers before 3 towering hoops, trying to block the hurled quaffle, a thankless and vital job. Ken, the books give us a wonderful young one. Ken, an obsessive captain who lives and breathes the role, and eventually earns his place with the ancient Puddlemere Club. The real game has its own legends of the position, the great solitary figures in their gloves, including the only goalkeeper ever judged the finest player in the entire world, and an Italian master who lifted the World Cup as his nation's captain at the remarkable age of 40, the oldest champion the tournament has ever known. There is something quietly poignant about the Guardian's art in both worlds. The player whose finest moments are the goals that never happen, the saves that leave no mark at all upon the score. The individual scoring records rhyme too, in their way. In the real World Cup, the all-time leading goal scorer is as of this very tournament unfolding now. That same Argentine magician, Lionel Messi, who, during the games being played this summer, overtook the long-standing record and now stands at 18 World Cup goals across a career spanning 2 whole decades. Just behind him sat a German named Miroslav, close with 16, and the young Frenchman Mbappé, who has scored 16 in only 16 matches, a rate of nearly a goal every single game on the sport's very largest stage. But the most astonishing scoring feat in the real game's history belongs to a Frenchman named just Fontaine, who in that same magical year of 1958 scored 13 goals in a single tournament across just 6 matches, a record so towering that it has stood completely unbroken for almost 70 years and very likely will stand forever. Compare that to the magical game's most dazzling speed record. It's held by a seeker named Roderick Plumpton, who, in the year 1921, is said to have caught the Golden Snitch a mere 3.5 seconds after the match began, ending the entire contest before most of the crowd had even settled into their seats. Hold those two records beside each other for a moment, in the dark, because they capture the difference between the games so perfectly. The real game's greatest scoring feat is one of relentless accumulation, 13 separate moments of brilliance piled up over weeks. The magical game's greatest feat is one of pure, instantaneous decisiveness, a single catch in 3.5 seconds that simply ends everything at once. The real game even has its own version of that lightning, of course. The fastest goal ever scored in a World Cup came after just 10 8/10 of a second, struck by a Turkish player almost from the kickoff, but it was still only one goal. In the magical game, 3.5 seconds can end the world. There is a deeper argument running underneath all of this, and it is the great eternal debate of the real game. And it turns out the magical game has been quietly having the same argument all along. The question is this: are these tournaments won by the single, brilliant individual, or by the team? Is it the genius who lifts the cup, or the collective? Ireland's 3 perfect chasers, working as one, defeated the lone supremacy of the greatest seeker alive. And the real World Cup has danced around that same question for nearly a century, with some tournaments crowned by a single transcendent star, and others by a flawless machine of a team in which no one man stood above the rest. The truth, I think, the gentle truth that both worlds keep arriving at, is that you need a little of both, and that the rarest and most beautiful triumphs are the ones where a genius and a great team finally find each other at the same moment. Pelé had transcendent teammates. The greatest individual seasons in football are almost always wrapped inside a side good enough to set the genius free. A seeker can catch the snitch, but if the chasers have not done their patient work, the snitch alone is not enough. Glory, in both worlds, is a marriage of the singular and the collective, and that is a rather lovely thing for a game to keep teaching us over and over in 2 different universes. It is worth pausing, too, on a quieter revolution that both worlds share: the rise of the women's game. In the Magical League, there is a famous and beloved club, founded more than 800 years ago, that has only ever fielded witches, never a single wizard. A proud all-female side, captained in the book's own era by one of the most formidable players of her generation. The red-headed heroine of the stories herself grows up to play professionally for that very team, a chaser of real talent, before going on to write about the sport for the wizarding press. And in the real world, the women's game has grown, in just the last few decades, from something barely acknowledged into one of the fastest rising spectacles in all of sport, with its own World Cup drawing enormous and roaring crowds, and its stars becoming heroes to millions of children who had never before seen themselves out on that bright field. Both worlds, the real and the imagined, are slowly learning the very same lesson, that the wonder and the genius and the glory were never the property of only one half of us, and that the game grows more beautiful, not less, the more people are finally allowed to play it. Let us turn now to the crowds, because a World Cup is never really only about the players, and here the two worlds are perhaps most alike of all. Both tournaments are, at their heart, enormous gatherings of ordinary people, painted and singing and weeping, who have traveled vast distances to stand together and care, with their whole hearts, about the same thing at the same time. The real game has produced crowds almost beyond imagining. The largest attendance ever recorded at a World Cup match was nearly 174,000 souls, packed into the great Maracanã Stadium in Brazil in the year 1950, to watch the host nation play on a day that ended in such national heartbreak that it has its own mournful name to this day. The magical crowds have their own peculiar splendor. At that 1994 final, the two nations brought their mascots, and the Lord describes them lovingly. Ireland's supporters were attended by leprechauns, little capering creatures who showered the stadium with what looked like real gold, while Bulgaria's were accompanied by the Vila, beautiful and dangerous enchantresses whose dancing could drive an entire stadium into a happy frenzy. Strip away the magic, and what is that but the universal carnival of the World Cup? The face paint, and the flags, and the drums. The way each nation arrives wearing its own colors and its own joyful madness, all of it gathered into one roaring bowl of light. I find that one of the most comforting things about both tournaments, truthfully, and a fine thing to think about as you grow drowsy. For a few short weeks, every 4 years, an enormous number of people who will never meet, who speak different languages and live entirely different lives, all agree to care about the same small drama with their whole hearts at the very same time. A planet or hidden wizarding world, briefly beating as one. There is something deeply reassuring in that, in the simple proof that we still know how to gather, that millions of strangers can still hold a single breath together and gasp at the same instant. Part of how that gathering happens, in both worlds, is the voice that narrates it, the storyteller who turns a distant game into a shared one. In the magical world, that 1994 final was called by a famous former player turned booming, cheerful commentator, its enchanted voice rolling out across the whole vast stadium so that every one of the 100,000, near and far, lived each moment together. And in the real world, the commentator's cry at the instant of a great goal becomes, itself, part of the memory, a sound replayed for decades afterward, so that millions of people who watched in a dozen different countries all carried the very same voice in their heads when they remember exactly where they were standing. The game is played by a few, but it is told and shared and made eternal by the voices that carry it out into the listening dark. The two games even share an arms race, a quiet contest of technology running underneath the human drama. In the magical world, it is brooms. Across the centuries, the lore traces a steady evolution of racing brooms, from the early clumsy models with names like the Oak Shaft and the Moontremor, through the popular Clean Sweep and Comet lines to the famous Nimbus series, and at last to the Firebolt, introduced in the year 1993, the fastest and finest racing broom ever made, the dream machine that every serious player longed to fly. To own the newest broom was to gain a real and measurable edge, and the wizarding world chased that edge as eagerly as any sport ever has. And the real game runs the very same race, only with boots and balls instead of brooms. The ball itself has been redesigned again and again across the decades, made lighter and truer and stranger, sometimes to the despair of the goalkeepers who must face it. The boots have grown into marvels of engineering. The training, the nutrition, the science of the body have all been pushed to almost magical extremes, so that the players at this very tournament are faster and fitter than any who came before, some of them competing well into ages at which their grandfather's generation would have long since retired. Both worlds, it turns out, are forever chasing the same dream, the perfect machine to set the human gift free. Now let us speak, as I promised, of violence, because it is one of the places the two games rhyme most darkly and most honestly. the magical game does not pretend to be gentle. There are, in its laws, 700 separate ways to commit a foul, and the full list is said to be kept hidden, lest it give players ideas. There are clubs in the lore famous for their brutality, one of them carrying a motto cheerfully admitting that if they cannot win, they will settle for breaking a few heads instead. Those two heavy bludgers exist for the express purpose of trying to knock human beings out of the sky. It is, beneath its grace, a genuinely dangerous game, and a real game, for all its beauty, has its own long shadow of violence. Its infamous matches, remembered less for their goals than for their brutality. Certain notorious finals and grudge games where the tackles flew like weapons and the referees lost all control, where players were carried off and tempers became riots. Every sport that means this much to this many people carries that danger within it. The way passion always shades toward fury at its edges, it is, perhaps, the price of caring so deeply. Both worlds know that the same fire that lights the wonder can, if it slips, burn down the house. And both keep playing anyway, because the wonder is worth the risk. Here is a difference between them, though, that I find genuinely beautiful, a difference in the very shape of how each game holds its tension. The real game is ruled by the clock. It lasts, in the main, just 90 minutes, a fixed and shrinking span of time. And so its drama is the drama of the deadline, of the seconds draining away, of the desperate final assault, of the goal that arrives in the dying moments when hope had almost gone, and when even that is not enough, the real game has invented its own exquisite tortures, the breathless extra time, and at the very last, the penalty shootout, that cruel and beautiful lottery where a whole month of effort comes down to a single kick and a single dive. There has perhaps never been a crueler or more beautiful example of that lottery than the most recent real final, the year 2022, when Argentina and France fought to a breathless draw through the 90 minutes and then through extra time, the young French prodigy answering the old Argentine genius goal for goal, 3 apiece, until at last a whole month of football, and a whole career of longing narrowed down to the simple terror of men walking up, one by one, to a single white spot, to strike a single ball at a single waiting keeper. It is almost too much to bear, that narrowing from a planet of billions of watching hearts down to 1 foot and 1 ball and 1 held breath. In the magical game, for all that it carries no clock at all, knows its own version of that knife edge, the constant knowledge that a single catch at any instant can end absolutely everything. Both games, in the end, love to gather all of their vastness into one tiny, trembling, decisive moment. The magical game knows no such clock at all. A Quidditch match has no fixed end. It goes on and on for as long as it must, until that tiny golden ball is finally caught. And the lore tells of games that stretched for days, even for months, and so its tension is of an entirely different kind. It is not the dread of the draining clock, but the dread of the sudden ending, the knowledge that at any instant, with no warning, a seeker might spot a flicker of gold, and the whole thing could be over in a heartbeat, no matter how the score stands. One game keeps you watching the clock, the other keeps you watching the sky. And both, in their opposite ways, are almost unbearably exciting because of it. When you set all of this beside one another, the real and the imagined, the grass and the sky, the single ball and the 4, you begin to see that the differences are really only costumes, and that underneath them both games are wearing the very same heart, because what is a World Cup in either world truly about? It is about a dream of glory so large it can hold a whole nation. It is about the unbearable, exquisite tension of a contest that matters far more than it has any right to. It is about the genius and the team, the moment and the grind, the heartbreak of the brilliant loser, and the joy of the complete and worthy winner. And above all, both are about that one thing I keep returning to, the thing that makes them more than games. They are about the way a contest can briefly gather a vast and scattered people into a single feeling. The way millions of separate hearts, for the length of one match, can rise and fall together as though they were one. Whether it is half the real world watching a final on glowing screens in every time zone at once, or an entire hidden magical society packed into a stadium conjured out of empty fields, the miracle is the same. For a little while, an enormous number of strangers care about the same beautiful thing together, and are, briefly, no longer strangers at all. So let yourself sink down now, as the night settles around you, and let me paint you the two pictures together, side by side, to carry you off to sleep. Picture, on the one hand, a great stadium at dusk in the real world. The floodlights coming on one by one against a darkening sky, the impossibly green grass glowing beneath them. A low ocean roar of 100,000 voices rising and falling like surf. And somewhere down on that bright field, a single small figure with a ball at his feet and the hopes of a nation on his back. And picture, on the other hand, the magical version. A stadium raised by enchantment in a quiet valley. The air above it thick with players streaking across the night sky on their brooms. Trailing color, the leprechaun gold raining down, and the great crowd gasping as one. And far up in the dark, almost too high to see, a lonely seeker drifting in slow circles, watching, always watching, for the first golden flicker that will end it all. They are the same picture, really, the bright field and the dark sky, the lone genius and the roaring crowd, the long, patient grind and the single magic moment that can change everything forever. 2 World Cups, one real and one dreamed, and beneath their wildly different rules. The very same ancient human longing to gather together and to witness something glorious and to belong, for a few short weeks every 4 years, to something far larger than ourselves. Nothing in any of this asks anything of you tonight except that you rest. There is no final to win and no snitch to catch before morning. The great tournaments will keep turning over in their slow 4-year rhythm, whether you are awake for them or not. The goals being scored somewhere in the bright distance, the gold still raining gently down. You're allowed to let the day's contests end. You're allowed to set down whatever you've been chasing and let the long match of your day come to its quiet final whistle. So let the roar of the crowd soften in your mind into a low and gentle hum, like the sea heard from very far away. Let the floodlights blur and dim. Let the players slow and drift and settle till the great bright field is empty and still, and the stadium lights go down one by one, and the only thing left in the whole sky is a single small flicker of gold, hanging quietly in the dark, in no hurry at all to be caught. And the very last thing I can tell you, the truest thing hidden inside both of these beautiful, impossible games, is the simplest one. In the end, it was never really about the winning at all. It was about the gathering. It was about all of us, real and imagined, leaning the same way for a little while and gasping together at something wonderful. You belong to that tonight just by listening. So rest now and let the golden glint drift off into the dark, and let yourself drift with it. Good night.